Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, and in this little corner of BookTube, that starts the fusillade of weekly check-ins for reading, either Friday reads, or Saturday reads, or weekend reads, or Sunday reads, or weekly check-in, whatever we want to call it. A lot of us periodically will touch base on how our reading is going. I don't do it as often as a lot of other people. I don't do it as often as I think I probably should, especially since it's so much fun. Those videos are so much fun to watch. But I had a very, very good reading week this week. In terms of number of pages read, in terms of number of books read, I had a very, very good reading week. Mostly because there was precious little else to do. It's been boiling hot in Boston for the last week, and it's going to be boiling hot in Boston for the next week as well, before there's any hint of possible relief. Which has meant, I don't feel like doing anything. I don't feel like running any errands or doing anything. You've noticed there have been no Brattle visits. No visits to the Brattle bookshop. And B, it also means that my little dog, my little squib of a schnauzer, doesn't feel like doing much either. At first, she did. At first, she felt like lunging outside, as she always does, and just covering acres and acres of ground, the way we like to do, chatting the whole time together. But now she's realized it takes a little longer for dogs to sense this kind of pattern than it does for humans to do. But now she associates going outside with our walks being horribly uncomfortable, incredibly hot on her feet as well. Which has meant that my circle of activities, which is never very great to begin with, has narrowed to mostly just reading. In the little bubbles of comfort that are provided by my two little AC units. And that's been wonderful. That has been wonderful. I would rather it be more varied and a little bit more active, but I've had a great reading week. I got a lot of reading done. I want to show you some of the highlights or lowlights from that week. I won't show you them all. I don't want it to be a 2-hour-long video. I did a lot of rereading this week. I have found that when the temperature goes up, when it's hot, and that is true even here in Hyde Cottage, when the minute we step out of the bubble provided by these AC units to even another room, it's not central air. It's just these two little units chugging away in the window, and the minute you step out of that bubble, you realize the rest of the place is hot, to say nothing of the outside world. And I found that when that is true, I tend to want to reread. So there are some rereads on this list. But not this first one. This first one is new, and it is an indie book. I'm not 100% sure if it's out yet. I think it probably is. It's by William Mabaney, and it's called Climate Opportunities Knocking at Your Door. It's a climate change book. It's a climate mitigation book. It's extremely well illustrated. It's a beautiful thing to flip through. And it's also extremely well sourced. This author knows all about the energy industry because he was for a long time a part of it. He's been a frontline soldier in working not just to mitigate climate change, but also to adapt to it for a lot longer than most of his readers have known there was such a thing as climate change, and this book reflects that. So if you're looking for a climate emergency, that's what it is, a climate emergency book that is not alarmist and not fatalist and that is well informed, you might want to get this. Certainly the author wouldn't mind if you did. Okay, this next one might get a video of its own. This might get a video of its own. It depends. A lot of you have asked me about this in emails. This is a comic book. It's not a book at all. I don't know why I put the picture here. This is X-Men #1, which came out this week. There's a whole bunch of new X-Men titles relaunching, and those of you who don't follow the X-Men comics, one interminable era of X-Men has ended, and now a new era has to begin. And it's beginning with a flurry of first issues, and I got X-Men #1. It doesn't do any of the things. It does. There are half a dozen things that a first issue of a comic book is supposed to do. One of those things is to hook you with a story. But all 5 other things are not done by this issue. All 5 other things are not done. It's supposed to interest new readers. It's supposed to contextualize everything that it's presenting to those new readers. This doesn't do anything like that. It doesn't do anything like that at all. It doesn't introduce. There are 10 characters in this issue. It introduces 2 of them. And the others are not introduced. They're not clarified in any way. If you don't know who this guy with the pink hair is, you're not going to learn it in this issue. If you don't know the history of this big guy with an X on his helmet, you're not going to learn it in this issue at all. Wouldn't take more than a panel, a line even, to give you the background that you need for a lot of these people. You don't get it. In other words, this is the first issue aimed at people who have been following the X-Men for 300 issues, with no interest whatsoever in snagging anybody who hasn't been doing that, which is crazy. That's just crazy. Also, quite a bit about the X-Men is being subtly reshaped here in ways that I know we're not supposed to care what the original creator of the X-Men, Stan Lee, would care about these things. And we're not supposed to care what the epic recreator of the X-Men, Chris Claremont, would think about these things. But I've been along with the X-Men from the beginning for those 300 issues and a lot more. I've been with the X-Men from the beginning. I really liked the team originally. I didn't like some aspects of it. I didn't like the fact that, for instance, mutation was being tossed around when there's no mutation going on here. These are just magic powers. But one thing I liked about the original X-Men is that they presented an interesting contrast to other super teams in a couple of ways. First of all, they were students. They're young people, very young. They don't quite know what they're doing. They have their teacher leading them. And second, at the beginning anyway, they seem very underpowered. They seem like a team that it wouldn't take much to defeat. That isn't actually true with the original X-Men. If you look at them on paper, if you train them to be effective in the field, they could be very, very effective in the field. They're just not. They're not trained that way. They're not utilized that way. So I followed along, and I have therefore seen a number of X-Men first issues, and they're always bad. And this one is the X-Men #1 by Stan Lee is the best X-Men first issue that I've ever seen. Maybe Giant Size X-Men #1, Chris Claremont's reinvention of the team. That might also work. That might also be right up there. But most of them make the same mistake that this one does. They assume they're preaching to the choir. And since I didn't follow that last big X-Men storyline, I had very little idea who a lot of these people were and what they are now, what their incarnation is now. I don't know why the big guy with the X on his helmet is not a bad guy, for instance. I don't know why the characters kept referring to Magneto as Max when his name is Magneto or Eric. That must be a reference, a holdover from that last storyline that I didn't read. It wasn't very good, in other words. The art by Ryan Stegman was quite enjoyable, but the issue wasn't very good. Then we have, okay, this also wasn't very good. Energetically written, spryly written, so you will keep reading it. This is by Matt Fraser, and it is Don't Wait Till You're Dead. And it is him talking to ghosts in the afterlife and passing along their wisdom to the living. Apparently, he makes his own living doing this, being an extremely lucrative psychic that connects people with the afterlife, connects them with their loved ones in the afterlife, brings back messages from the beyond. Naturally, I wasn't going to get along with this book. I was amazed that I got a copy, but I read it anyway, and he seems like a likable guy. He is not a likable guy. He's a liar and a grifter. But he seems like a likable guy, and he poses like a likable guy on the printed page. So I guess it's interesting as a reading experience. But of course, it has an enormous central conceptual flaw, which is that it's based on a complete lie. There is no afterlife. There is no supernatural element to life. You no more extend your life and go off to live in some nether generation than an ant you stepped on this morning, or a squirrel you hit with your car last week, or a pig that you ate this week. You no more have a supernatural continuation of your existence, of your awareness, of your being able to talk and tell things to your nephew Joey than those animals do. And Don't Wait Till You're Dead, therefore, becomes an incredibly ironic title. It becomes incredibly ironic in a way the author certainly does not intend. You shouldn't wait until you're dead, and you shouldn't believe in this kind of crap, because it dilutes what you're doing while you're here. It dilutes the immediacy, the joy, the extreme value of the relationships around you now. How could those relationships possibly have the same amount of value if you think they're going to go on forever? if you think there's barely a thin tissue veil between you just having an all-day sit-down chat with Uncle Fred. The book, in other words, it predictably infuriated me. I don't know what you'll make of it. This next one, this is by T.J. Newman, who, it's a novel. It's I would call it an airport novel, but for obvious reasons, I don't think this would be a hit at airports. But he writes thrillers, and they are wonderful. I'm not sure, actually, now that I think about it, that T.J. Newman is a he. But T.J. Newman, the author, writes thrillers, and they are terrific. Oh my God, they are such mindless popcorn reading. If you want that, and of course, when it's a week of 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees, just nonstop, with the nights only going down to 75 degrees, which is the key. The nights aren't cooling off. That's the key to how uncomfortable this all is. This oppressive blanket of heat over the region. And again, I know that at least a third of the lower 48 in the United States is being charbroiled. This weather that I'm complaining about would be a relief for places that are getting up to 115 degrees every single day and going to only down to 90 degrees at night. I know that, but it's still bad here. So this was just a joy to read. This is a book, of course, since it's a T.J. Newman book, it's called Worst Case Scenario. I didn't get a large print edition. I'm just showing you pictures here. I'm showing you pictures just because I don't want to be bothered to get up and go and shag these things from the shelves or whatever cubby holes they're in. I have one right next to me that I'll show you, but only because I was reading it. I was reading it here on the fainting couch. And this is the story. Of course, it's the story of a plane going down. This is a T.J. Newman book. But the plane, you'd think it would be bad for a plane to have a catastrophic malfunction and fall out of the sky. And that is bad. But this is worse because it hits a nuclear reactor. Resulting in a gigantic series of catastrophes. And we have the usual stuff for this kind of a thriller novel. We have rogue agents, the one who walked away from it all. Don't bother me with your problems. I'm sick of saving the world. Who's dragged in for one last mission. We have, of course, U.S. powers that be officials and military officials and political officials. We have ordinary people on the ground. It's wonderful. It's by the numbers. There is no inventiveness at all. There's nothing in the way of dialogue or characters. Nothing at all. Doesn't matter. I think we can agree, right? That it doesn't, at least on this channel, at least in this little corner of BookTube, we can agree that you can shift gears as a reader. You should, if you want to get the most out of the one reading that you're going to do, because you're not going to be reading in Matt Fraser's Afterlife. You're not going to be in Matt Fraser's Afterlife. If you want to get the most out of reading, you have to just shift gears. If you want to be a 1 or 2 gear snob, fine. If that brings you reading pleasure, fine. Then more power to you. Fill your boots, as the Irish say. But it's still going to be a lot less pleasure than you would get otherwise. If you like it, if that's the kind of reading that you like, then by all means go do it. But it's not the kind of reading that I like at all. I like to shift gears as much as possible, and I thought this was a hoot. Just an absolute hoot. The plane falls out of the sky and hits a nuclear reactor. Okay, then we have something serious. This is a work of history. This was terrific. Meaty and textured. Just the kind of book that I was looking for without knowing that I was. This is by Clara Bingham, and it's called The Movement. And it's a history of the women's liberation movement from the early 1960s to the early 1970s, which I watched from its inception all the way to its heyday. I watched it being maligned. I watched it having exactly the kind of seismic social waves that it was supposed to have, that it should have, because the title of this movement was not hyperbole. It really was freeing women from social bondage, a kind of social second-class citizenship that they are almost certainly going back to in our lifetimes here in America. So a parabola rather than just an upward trajectory. That's horrifying. Women are already second-class citizens here in the United States as of 2 years ago. A man has total control over his medical decisions, and a woman does not. A woman needs state permission. Men, state permission for a whole swath of medical procedures. That's going to get a lot worse, a lot more drastic. The powers that be that are growing in this country, and this is, after all, as I've said many times, a fascist majority country, There's a particular kind of fascism that if you have a fascist majority in your country, it's only a matter of time before you have a fascist government. And then, in the long term, of course, if you have a fascist government, it's only a matter of time until outside forces physically destroy you, because the international community can stand all sorts of dictatorships, it can stand all sorts of communism rule, but it can't stand rabid land-grabby fascism. It destroys it like it does an internal infection. But we don't have to worry about that. But the forces that we do have to worry about that, but not for this video. The forces that are gaining strength in this country want women not only to have no reproductive rights, but to have no rights at all. Can't have a bank account, can't write books, can't read books without a man approving of them. Can't vote. Certainly can't vote. Oh my God, these people hate the 19th Amendment almost as much as they hate no-fault divorce. They want to enslave one half of the population, the way that half of the population has been enslaved for most of the time that it's existed. And that's what made the women's liberation movement, deridingly referred to in the popular press as women's lib, so thrilling. What if I want a job of my own? What if I want a bank account of my own? What if I want to open a line of credit at the local grocery store on my own? I don't want the owner of that grocery store to take me aside and say, you want to open a line of credit? That's great. Just bring your husband in here. No. My husband doesn't shop for food. He wouldn't even know how to find the building that you run. I am here every day. I want a line of credit of my own, on my own name. All those basic things. What if I want to sign a mortgage? What if I want to sign a lease for an apartment in New Orleans or New York? Can I do that? Is that my brother doing it with me? It makes it thrilling. And oh my God, Clara Bingham does a great, great job enhancing the voices. This is really an oral history. It's enhancing the voices of the people who were there doing the struggling and describing the obstacles they faced that seem unthinkable to young women in America today. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Especially if you lived through that period, you would love it too, I think. Then we have a debut, a fiction debut. I think there are a couple on this list this time around. This is Evenings and Weekends by Oisin McKenna, what any of us was doesn't need to be held against us. He was once upon a time a saucy super hottie. And I have nothing but respect for that, since I also, once upon a time, was a saucy super hottie. And this is his debut novel about all the people that he knows. This is his debut novel about his Twitter feed. A group of Londoners who are facing the usual obstacles, the usual problems that you would expect. Of course, Oisin McKenna lives in a world in which 90% of the population is gay. They might be repressing it. They might be forced to repress it by the jackbooted thugs that run our world. Oh my God, these young people don't have any idea what jackbooted repression is like. And the tragedy is they're about to find out that they were actually living it pretty good. But anyways, it's difficult to hear some of the self-righteous, whiny soliloquies that characters are given in this book. The soliloquies are interchangeable. The characters, unfortunately, are largely interchangeable. But I of course, as the kids say, vibed with this book just a little because it takes place during a heat wave, and I'm reading it during a heat wave, so I sympathized a little there, although atmospheric descriptions are not this author's strong suit either. This is a debut novel, so I'm cutting it a huge amount of slack. This author has a way with words, I would hope. I would hope that would be true, and it's true. This author has a way with words and a way with witty apothegms. There are few too many of those. People don't usually produce those on a regular basis. I have this problem with a lot of young contemporary fiction writers. Their characters tend to talk like they've been waiting for their close-up, like they've been storing up these great one-liners. It's not real, it's not realistic, and it's not all that involving because it prevents you from thinking of these characters as real people. Real people don't act or talk this way. Which I assume, I'm not asking Oisin McKenna to be a realist in the Frank Norris line, but I'm assuming that he wants readers to identify with his characters. And maybe a lot of them will. I've heard rumors that this is a Reddit darling of a book. It was picked by Barnes & Noble, I think, which is a pretty good payday for the author. It marks an auspicious beginning, that horrible phrase that critics use. It's gay fiction. It's something for the gays. You need something for the gays. And so much contemporary gay fiction these days is so sullen and fight-picky. that I guess it's serving an audience, but I don't like to think about that audience. So I enjoyed parts of this. It should be an involving story. There's one character in particular here who's not gay, and she's facing the kind of dull-edged, damp, ongoing, vague crisis that afflicts so many young people these days. And parts of that crisis are well described. I wish it had been her story instead of shoehorning in all these whiny people, all these whiny circuit boys. I wish that it had been more of her story. But I did mostly enjoy it. You would mostly enjoy it too. I think I'd probably test it out at the library first, unless you get a great deal at your Barnes & Noble. It will be discounted at your Barnes & Noble. If it's a pick of Barnes & Noble, it will be discounted. Then we have Peng Shepherd, who's an author I have sometimes liked. And this is All This and More, the new novel. Again, about a woman very much like one of the main characters in McKenna's book. A woman who feels that she's made all the wrong decisions in her life, all of the wrong choices, all the wrong paths taken. Her life is disappointing to her. And she is given a chance to participate in a fantasy game show that uses quantum tunneling technology to allow you to rewrite your own history, right? The basic layman's understanding of quantum mechanics is that every incident opens up an alternate quantum timeline. It's not very well thought out. This is obviously not intended to be science fiction, but it instead intended to be a kind of extended meditation on the age-old question of what would you do if you could do it all over again, and would it make you happy? Where would you change things, and what would you do? And I thought it was good. It was good along those lines. It didn't knock me out of my shoes. I wish it did. I want all the books on my Friday reads to knock me out of my shoes. Nothing really did this week except for The Movement, which I loved, and also there's one coming up that. And there was one that I don't think I'm talking about in this video that also sort of knocked me out of my shoes, but in that way that I know you're familiar with it, where you read a book and most of us, we're not wildly up in the air about a book when we finish it, right? I'm talking to a whole bunch of really experienced readers. I myself am an experienced reader. Usually when you finish with a book, no matter what kind of book it is, shipbuilding book, presidential biography, getaway fiction, beach fiction, no matter what it is, you finish it and you're not all sixes and sevens about what it was. Okay, I've read things like this before. I kind of know what I think about this. I kind of know what I think about this. I think in a way, most of us are critical readers, whether we ever hone those skills or not. And one of the books that I read this week that I'm not talking about in this video didn't strike me that way at all. I was in sixes and sevens. I liked it, but I also thought maybe it was important. Maybe I loved it. I wasn't sure, so I didn't put that on this list. This wasn't that. Most of the books I'm going to talk about today were not that. This was, first of all, it was intensely predictable, but that's not a legitimate complaint for a book. For me, anyway, I don't need to be surprised. It was intensely predictable, and that's not necessarily criticism, but it was also lazily predictable, which is a criticism. And the main character, and unlike the McKenna book, this book entirely belongs to that central character, and she's not interesting enough. No alternate version of her is interesting enough to really do it. So I liked it. I thought it was well done, but competently done, but it didn't do anything really for me at all. It didn't excite me. This next one ended up exciting me. It also seemed predictable at the beginning. This is Liz Moore's new book, The God of the Woods, in which we center on a group of people at a rural resort. And one of the people at that resort goes missing. And it's not just anyone. It's the child of the person who bankrolls the resort and who owns the gigantic manor up on the hill and who's had a kid go missing before. It's a departure for Liz Moore, this book. Large parts of it are a departure for her. Into a little bit more plot-driven, a little bit more gritty, even procedural fields, and she does it really well. This is really, really enjoyable. If you don't expect too much of it, it also is predictable. As most split timeline storylines are, you get so that you can spot the MacGuffin that's going to be all important. a mile away. You get so you can spot it as soon as it appears. None of these things have really done much with that kind of split chronology storytelling method in quite some time. There was one book years ago that did it, really played around with it. This one doesn't really do that. It doesn't really play around with it all that much, but it is very enjoyable. Very page turning. A lot. I know that Liz Moore would probably not like the comparison, but a lot like the T.J. Newman. So I very much enjoyed it, especially figuring out what the heck is going on with two people going missing from the same family. That, at first, seems very clear and gets murkier before it gets brighter, which is really well done. It was a good novel. I'm not sure. I mean, these new novels are exorbitantly expensive. I know I'm not the person to say that since I'm getting them for free, but The God of the Woods is a good novel. You will enjoy it. I think you will be very satisfied by most aspects of it, but you won't. What is it going to be? $30? You won't be $30 satisfied. That's crazy. That's a meal with a friend. So, again, the library maybe, or super discounted, something like that. Then this next one is one that I've shown on this channel. I could not resist it, so I read it. It's The Persian War by William Shepard. Which is, the subtitle is the Persian War between Greece and the Persian Empire, as seen through the eyes of the two really great historians that were concerned with it, and a whole bunch of other people, a whole bunch of other satellite literary and historical evidence and figures and whatnot. That would have been fascinating on its own. But this turned out to be much more. I should have paid more attention to the subtitle. This is really, I mean, I don't mean to sell the author's effort short. This is not a new book, obviously. I don't mean to sell the author's effort short, but this ended up being a very long, very energetic, and very loving commentary on Herodotus, which is, if anything, better than the original description that I had in mind. The subtitle says, in Herodotus and others, but Herodotus completely dominates this book. And since he's one of my favorite authors, his book is one of my favorite books, I was overjoyed with that. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. I was expecting more of the story of the Greeks versus the Persians has been told before. It's been told by historians before, using Herodotus and others to piece together that, plus archaeology and whatnot, to piece together what actually happened and where and when and how important it was and how historians might be distorting it. And that story is interesting. But this I liked so much more. I liked it so much more because it's all about Herodotus. Okay, then this next one is Treasure Vermont Life, which is the one that I have here with me. Because I wanted to have it with me because I wanted to show you that it's oversized, it's illustrated in black and white and color. It's all these things are archival now. All of these photographs, they weren't archival when they started, a lot of them, but they are now. As a treasury of Vermont Life magazine, which is what this is. It's a 10-year anniversary celebration of Vermont Life magazine. So this came out in the mid-50s. Vermont Life magazine started in the mid-40s and went on for a long time. It went on until I started visiting Vermont, and then they just packed up shop. They just closed up the building. But it's occasional prose. It's pieces written for Vermont Life. So it's what it's like to snowshoe in midwinter. That doesn't happen in Vermont anymore. It's never going to happen again. We don't get winter anymore. Vermont got a little bit of winter this last winter. It started very late. It ended abruptly, but it was a good reminder. But by the time this decade is over, Vermont will not see snow anymore. And I believe that Vermont, like most of New England, is also charboiling in the heat right now. And so Vermont Life wasn't entirely intended to be a love note to a bygone era. A lot of it was. The magazine had historical articles in every issue. Here's what maple syruping used to be like. Here's what fishing on this river used to be like before the mill went in, that sort of thing. But now all the articles in here have the feel of a bygone era, and they're wonderfully written. Just wonderfully. I had loved this book. Just loved it. Whether it's morbid or not to do so, I just loved it. And then we can finish up with a mass market paperback that I found at a little free library. I found The Quiet American by Graham Greene. Which this old Bantam paperback refers to as Graham Greene's great novel of Vietnam. That, I guess, may technically be true, but boy, oh boy, does it missell the book. This is mainly the usual Graham Greene stuff, a doomed relationship between a totally gormless guy and a woman that he has wronged and will continue to wrong. It had the usual Graham Greene set pieces. I think I've read this 3 times now. I don't know why I keep going back to this author. History and the literary establishment and my own critical profession have established Greene as a figure, as a major figure in 20th century English fiction, and I guess there's no shaking that. I've almost never seen why it's true. I keep going back to him. I keep going back to him. I keep going back to Charles Dickens. I keep going back to these authors because I keep being told I'm missing something, and I keep getting stuff like this. This shouldn't have been a novel. First of all, it's drastically stretched, and there's set pieces. There are interesting set pieces. This was a period in Greene's fiction where his most interesting set pieces are internal, and that's good. That's interesting, but it's boiling hot. I know that part is on my mind. That's not fair to Graham Greene. That part is on my mind anyway. It's boiling hot. Everybody's soused on whiskey. Everyone's dreams are broken. I'm not asking for this writer to break out of a mold. Writers can pick a patch of ground and just work it forever. If I love that in Jane Austen, if I love it in Anthony Trollope, I can't condemn an author for doing that. But you have to find something new in that ground, and you have to make the ground at least partly inviting to readers who aren't on that ground. And I always take events like this, where I'm looking at a little free library, or I'm browsing at the Brattle Bookshop, or a library book sale or something, and I encounter a Graham Greene novel. I always feel like that's a bell tolling, that the gods are pushing me, see? And I always fall for it. I always grab these things and reread them, but they don't do anything for me. Maybe it's just on a personal level. Maybe regardless of how good he is as a literary figure, maybe Graham Greene just doesn't appeal to me. It could be as simple as that. But he doesn't appeal to me. So I reread this again, and the main female character, her name, we're told, translates to Phoenix. I can sense Graham Greene trying to give her texture, trying to give her nuance, and it fails. It just fails, and I can't help but think it fails, not because his characters are sexist, but because he is. I can't help but think that my reading failure in the book, wanting that character to come alive, doesn't happen because the author could not make it happen, which is a flaw of the book. That is a I don't know who I'm trying to convince. Probably some of you are Graham Greene fans. This one didn't do it for me. They never do. No, which one I find, they never do it for me. I'd rather read John le Carré than Graham Greene any day of the week, even though an alien visiting from Alpha Centauri would literally not be able to tell them apart, including their fiction. So whatever note it is, I don't know what the difference is, but it definitely works on me. So there you go. Sorry to end on such a contentious note. I guess there were contentious notes all throughout here. That is a bit of a Friday reads for me. That's somewhat some of the stuff that I read or reread this week. Some highs, some lows, and one of those weird, what was that? What was that I just read? I'm sure I'll be talking about that book as the year goes on, as the heat wave goes on. But as usual, with Friday Reads, I don't do them every week, but I would love to know what you're doing, what you're reading, whether or not you've had that thing we're all after of being blown out of your shoes by a book. Has that happened to you this week? I assiduously collect those experiences in other people as much as I assiduously look for them in myself. Because that's what keeps us reading. This is not an academic exercise. We're in this for passion, for the love of it. I firmly believe that high, that feeling, like the book The Movement gave me, is why we keep reading. Or to escape the heat. So let me know. Tell me all about both your Friday reads, your week. Those of you who don't make videos on the subject, I loyally watch all the videos on the subject. If you don't make videos on the subject, then feel free to tell me about it. And feel free to tell me about the weather, especially those of you who have been good-naturedly taunting me about the fact that you're not in a heat wave, that your weather is perfectly acceptable. I'll take those too. Just let me know. Tell me all. And I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.